Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journeys, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023. And that brings us to a release of a title which had been in the Criterion Collection previously in the Criterion Collection's physical media catalog. It had been, but then it wasn't, but now it is back. And it is back this time employing the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition format. And I'm speaking of a work which is designated by Criterion at spine number 409. And this is a work which is described as being from the year 1978. And the name of the filmmaker is Terrence Malick. And the name of the work is Days of Heaven. This is the work, the very haunting and lyrical and majestic and beautiful and chilling work, which is from the director, the filmmaker, artist extraordinaire, Terrence Malick, again described as being from the year 1978. And it has a phenomenal cast, included in which are, for example, Richard Gere and Brooke Adams and Linda Mance and Sam Shepard and Robert Wilkie and others. I'm speaking, of course, of this film, which is Days of Heaven. Terrence Malick's film, Days of Heaven, has returned to the Criterion Collection physical media catalog. It had earlier, a few years back, according to this earlier Blu-ray release, which is described here as being first printing 2010. We had the Blu-ray release, which was at the time restored high-definition digital transfer. But then it was out of print, made a bit unavailable for a time there, only to now triumphantly return to the Criterion Collection physical media catalog upon the occasion of this year, 2023. And I say the word triumphantly because we have the film itself. It's a great film. It's one of my favorites of Terrence Malick. And it is also on a new 4K digital restoration. And I'll just say right now, I'll talk a little bit more about the presentation a little bit later in this video, but I think it's a fantastic 4K restoration in terms of how I feel about it and how I engage with it in the context of this Criterion Collection release. It is amazing. So I'm thrilled with this re-emergence of this film back into the Criterion Collection physical media catalog. Days of Heaven, a triumphant return. And a great film to boot. And it is a film, if we were to describe or try to endeavor to describe the plot or story structure of this film, Days of Heaven, we would understand that it's set in the 1910s, so the early part of the 20th century. It is a film that is set forth against a type of backdrop of movements, migration routes and movements in the United States, and we follow our main characters, in fact, and who we meet immediately. And these are the characters portrayed by Bill. These are portrayed by Richard Gere and Brooke Adams. I say Bill because that's the name of the character, who's the Richard Gere character, and Abby is the Brooke Adams character. And we understand that they know each other. They are together very early on in the film, but also, and they are in a specific part of the country, Chicago. And there's aspects of early 20th century labor and steelworks and the like. But then something happens that's very tragic and very sudden and it's a very significant event which causes our main characters to essentially escape and flee. and they have to go to a different part of the country, and that brings them to the Panhandle area of Texas, which is down south in the country, the United States. And there's also with them the sister character portrayed by Linda Mance. And so we have now the three of them finding their way to a wheat field harvesting situation or condition with the farmer who is portrayed by Sam Shepard. And here we have a great setup for a human drama that is unfolding, because our characters, the characters of Bill and Abby, essentially are pretending to be what they are not. So they are pretending to be brother and sister, but they are in fact lovers. And the reason for this, or one of the reasons for this, this ruse, this set of lies, this cloak of lies, is essentially to establish a relationship or a potential relationship, because the farmer, now the Sam Shepard character, is apparently very wealthy, very well off in terms of the wheat fields and the farming activities. And the idea too is that he is sick. We understand that he is very sickly and very there's an illness that's involved that creates the possibility or the hatching of a plot to try to get at his money. And that then leads to the pair essentially trying to exploit any feelings that the farmer may have in the context of his position as a wealthy farmer, but also isolated, lonely, in this solitary standing house in the middle of this large expanse of a wheat field. There are the laborers that are hired in order to tend to the field, but there's also the sense of isolation and loneliness. And so our main characters seem to try to want to exploit that, or at least there is this plan to. And that involves a relationship between the farmer on the one hand and the Brooke Adams character on the other hand, Abby. And this then leads to love triangle, emotional jealousies, hidden passions, and rages, as well as the ever-growing beauty and majesty and dominance of the horizon and Americana landscape, which is based also in part on the aged and lived-in experience of a number of the characters that we meet, the characters perhaps like Robert Wilkie's character, and also aspects of the immigrant experience that are also interwoven into this wonderful tapestry of a plot. Then we have, as I say, the migrant movement action, which is in fact directly paralleled or directly mirrored in the flow of movement that our characters, Linda Manson, Brooke Adams, and Richard Gere's character are involved in that from the very get-go of the film. And this idea too of pain and loss and lies and deceit, but also the tenderness of human emotion and the development of love and romance. Because after all, there's this plot that's hatched, but what happens and what is the extent to which the sparks of jealousy will fly when things that are feigned turn out to be growing into genuine emotions of love and affection. And so therein lies this kind of wedge of distance, potentially between, say, the Brooke Adams character and the Richard Gere character. And that leads to a whole set of tensions that are just continually rising and rising and rising. And you throw into the mix this idea of the sweep of nature, the sweep of history, the growth and the persistence and growth of life, as well as the fear of a type of destruction and chaos, and a type of parasitic destruction and chaos, which is shown in the harshness of the landscape of nature. There's some really famous sequences involving the protection of the wheat fields and the harvesting and locusts, and while at the same time seeing that the seeds of not just the wheat, but also the seeds of rage and pain and jealousy are also perhaps inadvertently sown as the plot and time and space continue forth in the hands of Terrence Malick, who is shaping the very arc of time and space in his hands in a very malleable way, in a very poetic way, and a way that shows a lot of parallels and linkages. In terms of the macro and the micro, in terms of the intimate nature of the minutia of movement of the human heart, both in quote unquote positive directions and also quote unquote in negative, darker directions. It happens in the twinkle of an eye, or maybe in the brief feeling of a heartbeat, or it could happen against the context of grand sweeps of wind as they flow and show the rustling of the fields in this expanse, this wide expanse of Americana that is both beautiful and grand and majestic on the one hand, and cold and isolated and distant on the other. And it just shows that great, I think, juxtaposition between, again, the micro, the macro, the beautiful and the cold, or the warmth, and also the laconic. And so it all, I think, comes together in this type of wonderful grand mix of juxtaposition, contrast, contradictions, that also is mapping out, I think, the great sense of contradictions of the human heart and the complexities of the human heart, as well as the internal struggles and flows, as well as the external struggles and flows. So everything is interconnected in this way. And in the hands of Terrence Malick, we have things that seem to have a type of metaphorical quality out in nature. As I mentioned, the way that the fields are rustling in the wind, or the way that locusts seem to invade the whole space in a very violent and perhaps a sudden and destructive way. But also there's a feeling of catharsis. There's also a feeling of peace and tranquility. There's also the feeling of a type of inevitability of the passage of time, as well as the that are linked always to a feeling of a notion of movements of the mappings of the human hearts. And I say hearts in plural because there are many different hearts, because there are many different characters on the stage in this film, Days of Heaven. So there is this way in which the film employs this type of parallel structure that could be metaphorical, but it could also be intuitive. There's a type of impressionistic way that nature and humanity are, I think, intertwined in the tales that are told in the hands of Terrence Malick here. So we can therefore, as viewers, opt to or choose to view the scenes of the majestic quality of nature on the one hand, and the way that architecture is positioned, say the isolation of the house, and we can use that as visual cues to engage in a type of metaphorical analysis or interpretation of the character states of minds and states of, say, emotional profiles, which I think is a very valid and powerful way of viewing this film. And or we could take those images and let them soak in and let them exist in a type of maybe part of our subconscious as viewers of the film, and let them sink in and grow, much like the seeds that grow in the soil of the earth. And they grow in their own way, in their own zigzag, random, perchance way. And perhaps that's another way to view this film, as a means of us watching the film and letting it sink in. There is something that's intellectual about it. There's also something that's very emotional about it. And one, I think, when watching this film, Days of Heaven, or in fact any Terrence Malick film, I think has the great option of watching this film either as a type of great and powerful and profound intellectual exercise, the identification of literary and metaphorical parallels and connections, and or examining it from an emotional, interpretive, and intuitive viewing perspective, which I think is also equally powerful and equally profound, or perhaps a mixture of the two, or perhaps something completely different that this film lends itself to. I mean, I should also mention that there are a lot of qualities that are very literary, that are very biblical, that have a sense of the fundamental nature of movements of humanity. So they do, in that way, characters stand in for certain ideas or ideals or concepts, as well as movements of nature, movements of heaven and earth, as it were, that are also shown. And I think this idea of heaven and earth is very key as well, because not only do we get the aspects of life and death in this film in very clearly delineated and direct and profoundly moving ways. But we even get the visual cues of it. I mean, heaven and earth is actually seen in practically most of the shots of the film. That's represented by, if you look at, say, the cover art for the Criterion release, this idea of heaven and earth and the line of the horizon with the sky on one part of the screen and then the earth on the other part of the screen. And so we have, again, something ethereal and also corporeal at the same time, something that has this heavenly, spiritual aspect of the film while also being grounded in a sense of an earthy and perhaps cruel, quote-unquote, earthly reality. And I think that is personified so brilliantly. It's personified in the visual cues. I mean, I should mention Nestor Almendros and also Haskell Wexler in terms of their contributions to the cinematography, which is a great, interesting aspect to this film, which is also touched upon in some of the supplements, and we'll talk about that momentarily. But also, there's the earthly and heavenly quality, the corporeal and ethereal quality of the say, aspects of the performances. And I should mention the application of Linda Mance and her performance and her voiceover. There's a way that her voiceover narration in key parts of the film links to, say, renditions of events that seem to have happened either on screen or off screen. So it has that quote unquote earthly quality to it, but is also recalling aspects of biblical story and also things that seem, I think, very on purpose and poetically disjointed. And I think that lends itself to a sense of a kind of feeling of separateness. And that idea of separateness is, I think, can be interpreted, or one way of interpreting that is allowing us to further feel the idea of separateness from the body. And what better way to express that than, say, the soul or the ethereal? Thus, heaven and earth, I think, encapsulated so vividly, both in terms of dialogue and narration, but also visual cues and the cinematography, as well as the movements of the human characters, because, as I say, they go from the very quote-unquote ordinary and the mundane, the day-to-day minutia of things like a little look of the glance from the corner of one's eye, seeing how the grain is growing in one's hands, the taste of it, the smell of it, these mundane, ordinary day-to-day things that are also very direct and very earthly on the one hand, but there are also moments of things that are standing in for other things, looks that are suggesting things of a type of spiritual and emotional and perhaps dangerous quality. Again, the ethereal and the corporeal, heaven and earth combined in terms of visuals, in terms of the narration, in terms of the dialogue, and indeed the performances. And I should mention the great performances. I mentioned Linda Mance, who just extraordinary performance from Linda Mance, and also extraordinary performances from Richard Gere. The way that the camera captures his looks, when looks of passion that is submerged in a sense of a type of a lie or artifice, and also reveals the ever-growing and perhaps uncontrollable types of jealousy. And also that's very much counterbalanced in a great way with the performance by Sam Shepard, in a great way, a type of stoicism on the one hand, but also the rage and passion and range of emotion that occurs. And it is due to, among other things, what happens in terms of the aspects of the farming, but also the passions with respect to the character that is Abby, the great Brooke Adams, who shows a sense of depth and humanity, regret, guilt, transformation of feelings of deceit to feelings of perhaps genuine emotion, and a type of range of, say, emotional intimacy on the one hand, but also a type of transformation of feelings of being allied in one area or another. And that type of transformation is very subtle, it's very nuanced, and occurs quite almost imperceptibly over time. But the ultimate effect is also ever present, and it's done with such grace and style in the hands of the performancer by Brooke Adams. So, all in all, I should mention to Robert Wilkie, the great visage of Robert Wilkie, the face of Robert Wilkie, I think has such command and presence, and the brow and the wrinkles and the aged quality. This is a very much also a reflection of Americana, as shown through Terrence Malick's film here, Days of Heaven. What a powerful film this is. I'm so glad that this film has reemerged in the Criterion Collection as it has. So, for your great viewing delight, my dear friend, it returns here in this wonderful 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition. It is the film Days of Heaven. The Criterion Collection has released this film, or re-released this film, Days of Heaven, now on this occasion of 2023, this time relying on what's described as being a new 4K digital restoration. And we see here on this table the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition, 2 discs. So the first disc is the 4K UHD disc, and the second disc is the Blu-ray disc. So the first disc, 4K UHD, has the film and also the option for the commentary track. The Blu-ray disc has the film, the option for the commentary track, and the supplements. So we'll talk about the commentary track and the supplements a little bit later in this video. But let me just share with you some details that can be found in the staple booklet, the robust, many-paged staple booklet. And it says on page 37 thereof, about the master, and I quote, Days of Heaven is presented in the filmmaker's preferred aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1 on the 4K Ultra HD disc and 1.78 to 1 on the Blu-ray. The new 4K master on the 4K UHD disc was created from the 35mm original camera negative and was supervised and approved by director Terrence Malick, camera operator John Bailey, and editor Billy Weber. The 5.1 surround soundtrack was remastered from the original 4.1 magnetic track. The feature is presented in Dolby Vision HDR high dynamic range on the 4K UHD disc and high definition SDR standard dynamic range on the Blu-ray. So there's information about the presentation here for purposes of this new release. Let me, for purposes of just adding to the conversation here, pull out the booklet that had been part of the earlier DVD Blu-ray release, from 2010. And the booklet mentions the information about, it's called the transfer, on page 37, and it says here for the older or the earlier Blu-ray, Days of Heaven is presented in the filmmaker's preferred aspect ratio of 1.78 to 1. On standard 4.3 televisions, the image will appear letterboxed. On widescreen televisions, the image should fill the screen. Created from a 35mm interpositive struck from the 35mm A-B roll original negative, this high-definition digital transfer was supervised and approved by director Terrence Malick, original camera operator and renowned cinematographer John Bailey, and editor Billy Weber. Thousands of instances of dirt, debris, scratches, splices, and warps were manually removed, etc., etc. So it's interesting that they mention that in the earlier Blu-ray, Days of Heaven is presented in the filmmaker's preferred aspect ratio of 1.78 to 1. Whereas here in the newer 2023 release, it says Days of Heaven is presented in the filmmaker's preferred aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1 on the 4K Ultra HD disc and 1.78 to 1 on the Blu-ray. So we are getting slightly different aspect ratios, but just keep that in mind. They're very, very similar, but again, different, slightly different, but still different all the same. So just keep that in mind. But I would like to say that I was always very happy with how this looked on the earlier Blu-ray. I thought the earlier Blu-rays was the go-to when it came to this film. Now, I must say that I find this new 4K digital presentation experience to be incredible. There are subtle differences. There are also ways that feel like some kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but the subtleties lead way to wonderful experiences, enriching reviewings of this film. the way that the skyline looks, the way that certain colors are reflected in the sky. I mean, one thing about Terrence Malick's films, or Days of Heaven in particular, oftentimes you'll see lots of times shots of skies, but the sky will have a, a different color palette, sometimes magic hour, sometimes the dawn or the dusk, and so it's not always this pristine sky, but there's always activity within the sky, and that also includes the color palette as well. And there is a way in which the color palette, in regards to the exterior scenes, was well pronounced in my viewings of the earlier Blu-ray, but now with this 4K presentation, I feel like they are enhanced in a way that's subtle and nuanced on the one hand, but also suggests this idea of a delineation of color and depth on the other. I don't know how best to explain that. I mean, one of the things too is that I feel like, and I've watched the film a number of times, as much as I can, on the earlier release and then now on this newer release, and I feel like I don't mean to make it sound like it's a drastic difference, but there is ever so slight feeling of, and I don't mean this in a negative way, there's an ever so slight feeling that the film has a flat quality. I don't want to say it's totally flat, but it has a slightly flatter quality when I watch it on the earlier Blu-ray than I feel when I watch the 4K release. Now, that's not to say that a film, if it has a flat quality, makes it inherently weaker than, say, a film that feels like, when one watches it, or the presentation qualities when one watches it, the three-dimensional quality makes it, quote unquote, a better experience, end quote. I don't want to suggest that in the slightest, because in particular in this film, Days of Heaven, I could argue that a two-dimensional quality gives the film a feeling of landscape portrait texture. After all, this is a film that is very much expressing a type of expressing history in an impressionistic way, and so that, I think, is very subtly suggested by the fact that the film, if it has a kind of two-dimensional quality, gives it a feeling of a landscape painting portrait. And I think that also gives the film a sense of distance on the one hand, but there's an interesting, I think, psychological way that a flat quality can itself feel more direct than the three-dimensional quality. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it has there's a way in which, I think, to my eye anyway, I can adjust my distance to the film. I don't know if that makes any sense. Whereas a three-dimensional quality, there is very much a feeling of distance. You can feel the distance far away. And I think that has a great effect, even in a subtle way. It has a great effect when I'm talking about my experience with the 4K. It has a great effect, I think, of showing the depth of the landscape, the isolation, especially when I think of the psychological portraits of the characters as I read them. For example, the farmer character, Sam Shepard's character, the notion of isolation and being totally alone, that's such a key way of reading his character. And I think that can be further pronounced when one considers the vastness of the distances around him. And that's, I think, expressed when one feels almost a three-dimensional quality to it. So I don't know. I think at the end of the day, either feelings, I think, are very valid when approaching this film. But I think for me too, there is a way that that slight edge of, say, depth creates, as I say, that even ever so nuanced feeling of a heightened psychological intensity that makes for a very rich, rewarding experience, especially when being reminded of the fact that, as much as this film is about the grand nature of the landscape of grand nature and the landscape of the environment, as embodied by the fields, this is also very much an intimate portrait, an intimate explanation. And when we get a sense of things that are gliding through space, I mean, there's a very famous sequence involving a Panaglide camera movement over moving water, and the characters, and following the characters, and how that can be suggestive of something that has great grand distances of the background environment on the one hand, but also showing the intimate nature of the characters as they are, in a sense, feeling free. And free from the shackles of the type of lie that they are otherwise living in the context of the Texas Panhandle lifestyle that they are engaged in for most of the film. So this, I think, again, there's this whole level, potential level of engagement that is now opened up to one when one chooses to watch the film in the 4K. So at the end of the day, I don't want to suggest that the Blu-ray is any way inferior or the older presentation is any way inferior. But for me, this is magnificent, and I have very strong feelings about the Blu-ray. I also have very, very strong feelings of positivity about this 4K release. And I think that it really expands one's horizons potentially about how one can further engage with this film. Again, from a type of further enveloping into the world of Days of Heaven, which I think is very much in keeping with how one can read this film, as well as a type of distancing effect too, which I think paradoxically works wonders. So at the end of the day, which one would I choose? Again, I don't know. I guess that's why it's great to have the option of both. So but it's a wonderful edition, a wonderful release, a wonderful presentation of this film, and I think for many it'll probably be the standout go-to version when revisiting this film, Days of Heaven. And so now let us turn to the commentary track, which is part of this. The commentary track was is a commentary track that we actually saw in the earlier Blu-ray release, so it's nice to have that continuity. It's now carried over, and it's made available if one chooses to watch the film on the 4K UHD disc, or if one chooses to watch the film on the Blu-ray disc. So your choice. I happen to have the 4K UHD disc right now in the player as I speak. Again, I apologize again for YouTube copyright guidelines, guidance, just in case. Also, I just want to block out this side of the screen of my YouTube video because the Blu-ray or the 4K UHD disc has as its menu a looped series of montage scenes from the film. And so, just to be on the safe side, I'm just blocking that for purposes of this video discussion. But it's a very lovely series of shots for this montage looped Blu-ray 4K disc menu. And I select the commentary button, and I see that it says this commentary track features art director Jack Fisk, editor Billy Weber, costume designer Patricia Norris, and casting director Diane Crittenden. It was recorded exclusively for the Criterion Collection in 2007, etc. So once again, this was a Criterion Collection commentary track for the previous Blu-ray release, and now it's continued on for purposes of this new release. And it's fantastic. It is fantastic. We have these various members of the crew who are speaking about many things, such as the use of the photographic effect at the very start of the film that opens, the montage of photographs in the opening title sequence, the use of music, parts of music that are classical, very famous classical musical pieces, other parts that are based upon Ennio Morricone's work. And then also how some historical details, or perhaps even some anachronisms appear, or not, maybe not, anachronism is probably not the correct word, but there are some ways in which photographs reflect certain points of history that are meant perhaps to condense or truncate or otherwise abbreviate certain flashes of how history is treated. But it's done in, I think, a very legitimate and reasonable way. It's indicated in the commentary track by way of example. And also, there are some great ways that casting choices, casting what ifs, are also presented in terms of who were considered for some of these roles that ended up being portrayed by Richard Gere and Sam Shepard, for example. So, and also there's some great discussion about Terrence Malick and the approach and how working on a Terrence Malick film is like unlike any other filmmaking experience, according to these great artists that are featured on the commentary track. And so, and there's some suggestion, or there's a comment that is referencing the fact that a lot of the creation of the story ended up after the fact, or maybe during the filming, and that includes how much prominence was given to the character portrayed by Linda Mance. And so it gives way to some comments in the commentary track where some of the members are expressing surprise into how the film ended up versus their original understanding of the film when they first were beginning to work on it. And so there's some technical aspects too about camera movement, use of lighting, how some shots relied on the addition of certain light, or maybe no additional light, just natural light or natural light plus some other sources of light, etc. And that was very much part of the design of Terrence Malick. And Terrence Malick is described here as knowing so much about the photography and having such a strong command of the details of the photography as well. And not to mention, of course, the very key work, Nestor Almendros's work, and also Haskell Wexler's work as well, and also the performances too. Seeing the subtle intricacies of the performances: Brooke Adams, Sam Shepard, Robert Wilkie, and Richard Gere. Linda Mance as well, and Linda Mance and how Terrence Malick worked with Linda Mance in many ways. Trying to get that sense of childlike innocence and capturing it in some of the key, say, points of narration that are so much a highlight in a film that has many highlights. So this is a classic commentary track, and it's great to have it made available again. As I say, it was available earlier, and now it's available again. So if you haven't seen the film with this commentary track, now's your chance, because it is awesome. It's absolutely awesome. So that's the commentary track that had been included before, and now it's still included for purposes of the release by the Criterion Collection. And now I have the Blu-ray that's in the player right now, and it has a slightly different way of showing the montage stills of some of the scenes of the film. So it's again, it's an interesting similarity yet difference that we have with the 4K UHD Plus versus the Blu-ray. I'm so sorry I can't show it on the screen directly. Again, I just want to be sure that I'm careful with the copyright situation on YouTube. So just to be on the safe side, I've just blocked it out, and for purposes of this, I hope you can forgive me. But yes, it has a similar yet different feel in terms of the Blu-ray menu versus the 4K UHD menu. But I have the Blu-ray in the player right now because it does have the film and also the option to listen to the commentary track, which is what I have here. I should point out too that there's the index to the commentary track on the Blu-ray here, which is a nice detail. And then I've put here the Blu-ray because we have the supplements that are included here. And the supplements go, you press the supplements button, and it has two sections, one called actors and another called camera. So I press on the actors section, and we have we have a sub menu which has two options. One, it says Richard Gere, and the other says Sam Shepard. And it says the following audio interview with Richard Gere, set against images from Days of Heaven, was recorded exclusively for the Criterion Collection in 2007. The interview with Sam Shepard was conducted in 2002 and is courtesy of Struel International. So the interview with Richard Gere is approximately 22 minutes, and it is an audio interview that is over some montage of images from the film. It's a very wide expanse of an interview. It's a great interview, and I love Richard Gere's commentary. He talks about his background, how he wasn't initially, he was more interested in focusing on his career in the theater rather than motion picture work. But then he wanted to work with Terrence Malick after seeing and being so deeply affected by an earlier Malick film, which is called Badlands. And then also working with the actors and also working with Terrence Malick on the set in this process, and also just trying to get a sense of whether or not he would be in the film or not. So that was also a very long process, as he describes, because this is part of Terrence Malick's own, say, thought process in terms of pre-production. But he was eventually cast, and working with other great actors. He says he had a great working relationship with Brooke Adams. They knew each other before working on Days of Heaven. Also, he knew Sam Shepard in terms of Richard Gere's own work in the theater, and Sam Shepard and his own work as a playwright. So that's, I think, a very interesting detail. And it's interesting too because their characters in the film have an inherent rivalry between them, and Richard Gere describes how he was able to use that in their in terms of how they reacted or related to each other on set, which I think is in a very, I think, mutually respectful way. But still also to serve the intense nature of the relationship on screen, which I think is great. And also discussion about another great working relationship, that being with Linda Mance, and some great praiseworthy comments that Richard Gere has with regard to the great performance by Linda Mance here. So, and then other comments too about working in terms of the land and the landscape and the production details. So this is a great interview with Richard Gere, again, an audio interview with images underneath. So please check this out if you can. It's approximately 22 minutes. And then the interview with Sam Shepard. And here we have Sam Shepard. That's a one-on-one interview, and he's speaking, kind of looking slightly off camera. But this is totaling 12 minutes. And this is great, too, is because he speaks about working with, he says, working with Terrence Malick, working with Terry, as he says, and this idea of the collision of various aspects, which I really like, the expanse of the West, and also the solitary nature of the characters, in particular the character of the farmer. And also Terrence Malick being very, very shy, which is an interesting detail. And also, speaking of the film as a reading of the film, it can be an intellectual based reading. It could also be a very intuitive and emotional one as well. So I like that that concept. And there's a way in which there's a type of rugged nature to the approach here, and also some scenes involving. There's a scene that Sam Shepard mentions how he had a hand in writing as well, with the permission of Terrence Malick, and so it's a scene involving him, his character, and Brooke Adams' character alone. So it's a very key sequence in the context of the trajectory of the relationship of those two characters, by the way. So very interesting, fascinating stuff. And again, Sam Shepard's performance is very golden, and it's so important and critical, and it has a great counterbalance to that of Richard Gere. So it's a wonderful combination. A great interview through and through. This is approximately 12 minutes, so please check this out if you can. But then going back to the earlier submenu, we now go to the section called Camera, and I press this, and it has two sections here. One, John Bailey, and the other, Haskell Wexler. And it says, John Bailey served as camera operator under Academy Award-winning cinematographer Nestor Almendros on Days of Heaven. Both Almendros and Bailey had to leave before filming concluded due to prior commitments, and Haskell Wexler took over. Here, Bailey and Wexler talk about their friend Almendros, Terrence Malick's process, and their work in achieving the specific look Malick envisioned for the film. So, the John Bailey discussion, this one-on-one interview, it's it's fantastic. It has this sense of he talks about his work as a camera operator, use of handheld shots in some parts, and also he has this great way of viewing this in terms of the lens of 1970s contemporary American cinema. And he says this idea of how it was shot in a way that was very consistent with how other contemporary 70s American independent films, for example, were shot. And so I think a visual comparison is made with a film such as, say, Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets, which is like such a fascinating way of describing it. And also working with Almendros, and the personalities are very similar in terms of a type of almost a serenity nature, and also the way in which the bucolic nature of the environment called for certain uses of lighting and lighting techniques, sometimes relying on natural light, other times relying on additional sources of light, etc., and how that is helping a reflection of the microcosm and the macrocosm, etc. And also there's a very key sequence involving a conflagration of fire, a huge fire. And there's some details about how it was controlled chaos. There's some aspects of it that were controlled, but other aspects that were actually perhaps more dangerous than the participants might have realized during the time of the shooting. So All in all, this is a great conversation with John Bailey, and also a contribution of a reminder of the great contribution of Almendros' camera work, or cinematography. Excuse me. I forgot to say that the discussion with John Bailey is approximately 20 minutes, so please check that out if you can. But then we get Haskell Wexler, and you select this, and this is approximately 11 minutes, one-on-one interview discussion with Haskell Wexler. He opens it in a very interesting way about sort of the philosophical dilemma of documentary interviews. It's an interesting meta comment, very clever, very witty, and it's also maybe very subtly also linking to his own background in terms of works on documentaries, and that also perhaps informs some of his own choices, or the ways in which moments of quote unquote documentary truth end quote do appear in these lovely, one might call them asides, one might call them, maybe to borrow a phrase from Ozu, type of pillow shot effect, or maybe these ways of embellishing the world and the life and the environment of Days of Heaven. So, and also this idea of his admiration, the work of Nestor Almendros, etc., and also the circumstances involving Wexler's involvement in the film. And also there, again, as John Bailey had mentioned in the previous discussion, some shots revolve around handheld camera work, etc. There's a kind of chaotic frenzy that's inherent in that type of usage. So a very, again, the cinematography, the photography of this film is one of the utterly important aspects of this. And so the contribution of Almendros and Wexler, and then John Bailey, cannot be emphasized enough. And there is a fascinating way that these two cinematographers, have combined their work. And when we understand that the photography on this film was very complex, involving a number of figures, the fact that it comes together in this organic, integrated whole is itself a type of brilliant cinema miracle, and that's due, I think, to the great contributions of the cinematographers, including Haskell Wexler. So this is another great conversation and interview carried over from the earlier Blu-ray. So this is, again, approximately 11 minutes, so please check this out if you can. So that's it. When I say that's it, I mean we get so much already, which we had gotten in the earlier Blu-ray release. So we don't get anything quote-unquote new for purposes of this re-release of this film in the Criterion Collection 2023. But that is okay. That is definitely okay. What we do get is grand and fantastic and wonderful and very enlightening. And it's great to have it continue here. So I'm speaking of the commentary track, and then also the supplements that accompany this Criterion release of Days of Heaven. And so let us now conclude our conversation by speaking about other aspects of this release, the packaging and the booklet. It's in this plastic casing, and if we open it up, we have the discs, the two discs stacking format. They don't touch, but we have the Blu-ray and the 4K UHD disc, and the booklet, which I've removed prior to the start of this video discussion, would go on the other side of the interior of this plastic casing. So we have the two disc format in this plastic casing, which is itself very similar to the earlier Blu-ray, which is right here. Of course, the earlier Blu-ray is the single disc Blu-ray release, but it has a similar type of interior look to it. In terms of the single disc Blu-ray on one side and the Days of Heaven booklet on the other. It's a staple booklet, and we'll get to that as well momentarily. But as you can see, I think there is some continuity in terms of how it looked before and how it looks now. So that includes also the front and the back. So there we go. There's the back right there, and the way it looks in the back here. So it's a very it's a kind of iconic shot too that's used for the cover art design. So I should just point out here production credits: art director Sarah Habibi, menu and package design Lucien S.Y. Yang, art production coordinator William Breeze, art assistant Julie Sussman. And then let's turn to the booklet, which is a staple booklet, which is very much like the staple booklet that we'd seen in the earlier Blu-ray release. And so with just a few slight differences, I would say. Let's Well, first of all, we should point out that the booklet, as it had appeared in the earlier Blu-ray, it's a staple booklet. It has a number of pictures and some descriptions of the film, the cast and credits, and also it has the great essay by Adrian Martin, On Earth as It Is in Heaven. And we also have a table of contents, which also shows Shooting Days of Heaven by Nestor Almendros. It's a wonderful, great display here. Fantastic. The Shooting Days of Heaven by Nestor Almendros writing, again, goes into great detail about the production and the cinematography details. And then the Adrian Martin essay is another highly detailed Terrence Malick filmography, context, and then also details of the film. That again, I strongly suggest watching the film first before reading these two wonderful writings. But once you've seen the film, you can enjoy the great writings, which had occurred in the earlier Blu-ray booklet, by the way. Also, I should point out that the earlier Blu-ray booklet had a page which had a chapters breakdown page, which is right here. As you can see, there's a chapter page for the earlier Blu-ray booklet. That chapter page doesn't exist because the chapter pages don't occur in recent releases. So just to give you that. But there is instead a replacement, which is a still from the film. So you get an extra still, which you hadn't gotten, I think, in the earlier Blu-ray booklet, which is interesting. By the way, you do get also an extra still here on this page, on page 39, which is right here, which you didn't get in the corresponding page 39 here in the earlier Blu-ray. And I think that's due to the fact that the earlier Blu-ray had the text of special thanks, acknowledgments, and production credits a little bit spread out over 2 pages, whereas the new booklet for the 4K UHD Blu-ray combo has those pages, but a little bit condensed to allow for an extra still to be included. So you have, by my count, 2 additional stills that are included in the new booklet versus the older Blu-ray booklet. But it's still, I mean, the older Blu-ray booklet is still great, and for the most part, it does remain more or less the same, which is fantastic. So that's a little bit about the Blu-ray booklet and the new 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition booklet of Days of Heaven. Yes, Days of Heaven is back in the Criterion collection, so hurrah, congratulations, and wonderful news. This is fantastic news for those who are fans of Terrence Malick, and to see the great 4K UHD application process being applied so effectively, with this work, and just a reminder of how sharp and vivid and rich this film is, how lovely and beautiful and majestic this is, how emotionally complex this film is, and how lyrical and poetic this film is. It's a magical experience that is very dark and challenging and thought-provoking and mysterious, corporeal and ethereal, heaven and earth, life and death, everything all at once. It is the supreme masterpiece, Days of Heaven. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including Days of Heaven, including other films by Terrence Malick, including other films in the Criterion collection and beyond. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.